Covert recalls, in my opinion, are one of the most underused and impactful tools to check how well previous coaching sessions have been when it comes to true learning and understanding. What stayed, what's been embedded, how's the recall in understanding of application in the real world, not just in talking of answering the questions. So this is where I'm talking about you won't know how successful that session was in the session. And there's some extremes from that. So there is, on one end, and these are all we won't know, by the way, on one end, you're telling them what you want them to do. While they're actually doing it, you are shouting and reminding them what to do. And basically, they're doing what you want them to do in a very simple way. So there's no thinking, there's no real understanding required. But what you see, if you turned the sound off and watched it, could look fantastic. But it's false. So the reality is, we don't know there's any understanding. I very much doubt there will be unless they've already worked it out. There's no adaptation to what they're seeing. And actually the brains aren't working that hard anyway. So why do they need to remember anything? Because they'll just basically tell me what you want me to do, coach. Your problem with that is when you get into matches, it's the same coaches get angry and frustrated because they're not seeing what they saw in practice. Well, funny thing that. They weren't thinking. And the reality is we still don't know if they've recalled it anyway because there's been no check. Because in the next session, you're reminding them again and working them through it again. So it's just false. I mean, we're wasting time in reality if it's about developing athletes and not just them looking good in front of you while you shout at them or ask them questions or remind them. Now, the other extreme to that, we still wouldn't know, would be we have developed a very game-like approach. They do see the value, they do understand, and actually they're making great decisions based on what they see. So we definitely know there's thinking going on there. We're not shouting, reminding them of what they do. The challenge with that still, it's still fresh in their memory. So they're still focused on that. You're allowing them to focus on it. So although there's effective decision making, it's still in the forefront of their head. So we still don't know if we took that load away and got them to focus on something else, would it still remain? Now, there's some areas that I'm going to cover in the mastery course that would cover some elements and light and shade we can do in the session, but it's still in short-term recall. So whether covert recall comes in and the clue's in the name, we're checking a recall after this session. It's covert. So we don't talk to them, we don't remind them, we don't ask them questions before. They don't know what we're checking. And that statement is don't tell me, show me is really important because we don't want the discussion working. And you've seen how I've used this statement before, but it's actually, I want to see it. And covert is, I want to see it without telling you what I'm looking for. And this is the important element. So you can see now, we'll just talk through the left-hand side, then I'll show you what that means. It's just an example of an audit of covert recalls that is really useful for us to check where we are and check how our content loading is as well, because this could be adjusted based on this. So we know now it's a true check. It's checking how we're doing as coaches, but it's checking what's going in, and it's fine. If it's not going in, it gives us an opportunity to start asking some questions, and the questions could be, did we do it often enough? So we've covered it, and it may be 3 days ago, it could be a week ago, but we covered so much on that session. Although it looked good and they were thinking, did we cover too much? Was it too coach-led, i.e., although they looked like they were making the decisions, I was reminding them too much. When they were coming in huddles, I was telling them the solutions. While they were doing it, I was telling them solutions. So although it looked good, there wasn't a lot of thinking going on. So there's a few areas that actually could cause it, but at least we know. And the covert recall is done. It could be in the next session, it could be in a week's time, it could be in 2 weeks' time. You decide where they are, but they're pre-planned with the coaches, not with the players. They'll know you'll be doing covert recalls now because it'll be part of sessions. After the warm-up is a great time to do it. So my suggestion is after every warm-up, we throw them into a game situation. And it could be 2-3 minutes. We're not talking about a long time here. And what we're looking for is we will have as coaches something we're checking in the covert recall. And that checking is something we do in secret. So it's really important you don't use enough manipulation of the environment where they've kind of worked out, well, because you've manipulated this, I know what you want to see, or it could be one of two things. Make it real game. Don't give any clues, and you'll just poker face and you're looking and listening. Now, what you can do, is tell the other team to do a certain thing. So you can even load it where you say, okay, what I want you to do now, guys, is I want you to focus on, we've got a success criteria, which could be an offensive or transition, but your covert recall is a defensive covert recall. But now you've got them focused on something else. So they can really check now, hang on a minute, is that defense stuff that looked great and sounded great a week ago, are they still utilizing those new choices, execution, tactics, whatever it may be, when their focus isn't on it? Now, this will give us an indication of how well that's gone in. Now, there's some processes you can go through. So we're looking, we're scanning, and it may be right now, we know the tools, we've got the light and shade, we want to keep going, but it may be you either hot one-to-one one of the players, so pull them out, put someone else on and go, okay, just review, and they haven't picked something up, so you can put a trigger awareness in and says, okay, so what is it we worked on the last couple of weeks that could be used here? And you could see then the athlete goes, you go, do I need to say anything else? No, show me, push them back in, and then they can start communicating. If it's actually you've done that and the athlete's like, well, I can't get round to everyone, then you let it go. And another intervention may be, do you want to lead a 10-second timeout? 15-second, but it's got to be short. Yes, please give me that. Okay, 15 seconds on to Johnny. Everyone runs, Johnny says enough, and bang, and it's there. Now that's just telling us they can do it, but actually it's something that we haven't done often enough where it can just be forgotten, but they're capable of doing it. So it just needs a bit of a trigger. So that may be, okay, we'll just put that into more game scenarios so they have more opportunity to apply the new area. So there's a lot of ways you can do it, but the key point is, if it's successful, then we can tick a box to say, awesome, it went in, this is great, we're on pace, we're on track. If it hasn't, we ask some questions working through, okay, why could that have been of the reason? But what's important is now we have to adapt the session we planned because we're not ready to move on. The reason you've done that content before was it was more on the priority list of development. It was before the stuff you plan to do now. So basically you drop it off. Now I'm going to share with you some frameworks that can really help with that. But this is the principle. We're saying, okay, there's an issue. The recall is not as good. Okay, guys, let's talk about that. Let's review. And you may put in many different variables to put a bit more focus on that. It could be 5-10 minutes focus. Now we're seeing it. Okay, guys, you know what's coming? We're going to do some more covert recalls at some time in the future, but let's look for opportunities to utilize this new skill, this new tactic we have that allows us another option, but only use it appropriately. Don't just think coach wants to see it. Select it when it's appropriate. So now we're making those connections. So it's not a case of getting angry, because if the majority of people haven't recalled it, it's your fault. It's not their fault. It's your fault. If one hasn't, then we can ask ourselves, well, hang on a minute. Was that person there to start with? How engaged were they? How much interaction were they? Were they in a position where they were making effective decisions? Were they here, but they were injured on the sideline, and did they engage them enough? So it's the self questions from the no on the covert recall. And we just back to the detective again. We identify it's no problem, and then we can put in interventions to, one, deal with that, but secondly, prevent it from happening again. Becoming better coaches, we're learning from it, we're adapting. So this graph you see here is a very simple one when we're saying, okay, communication may be something you've said is a focus area. Early on at the 75% point of a session, which you'll see me talk about, what I mean by that is in that session when you integrate it, once it's integrated in gameplay, 3/4 of the way through the session, we step back and we see if they can do it without us. Now you can do that beforehand, but at the latest 3/4 of the way through the session. And the reason it's 3/4 of the way through the session is because then if they haven't, you've got time to put in interventions and step back again. If you do it at the end, then it's too late. They're walking off. So you're a little stuck then. The other key point that I see too often at all levels in sport is you'll work on something, and then because you feel, you know, the players love doing it, whatever, you let them go into a game. But what you don't do, you don't scan for transferability. We as coaches need a scan for that, and even nominate certain coaches, say, okay, you're scanning for this element, and we're looking. So if it's not there, again, we've got our tool of interventions. That may be a one-to-one, maybe someone on the sideline in open play, and then we move back to other elements that may be a player-led timeout, maybe a reset, and then it may get to a coach-led timeout. But what we're saying is that the reality is we're checking while in session to see if it's connected. So that's a covert recall in session 3/4 way through. We've got time to deal with it. We're giving ourselves time. And then you'll see covert 1 and 2. This is in future sessions. So what we're saying here is little note, right? I've got my covert recall. I'm going to do it in a week's time or in the next session, whatever it may be. And I can either put a tick in there, any comments, or if it's a no, just put in what was required. So you'll see communication. 12 minutes in the 75% point. They could maintain what that means there, and you set your own notes. They maintained it for 12 minutes. They maintained minimal acceptable communication for 12 minutes on the covert check when I stepped back in that session at 75%. So I was really happy with that. Then I do in the next session, I've done a covert recall, and initially the communication had regressed. So the note says there required 1 reset. So I used a reset on that. So it's basically bang, guys, reset communication. And they ran to the sides, ran back in, and then it was fine. So that's a little trigger. Again, there's not a lot of conversation going on there from me, is it? But it's a trigger reminder. Now, the next covert recall I did was another week ago after covert 1. And now I'm checking. So let's look. No for 3 minutes. Then self-adapted. So what we're saying there is, I didn't put an intervention in. I wanted to see if they could recognize and adapt. It took them 3 minutes to recognize, but then they self-adapted. So that's progress. So what we can do now is my strategy would be, could I get that 3 minutes down? So remember, when we're talking about this, and I'll go a lot more into the mastery course on this, but we need to get to a point where we can recognize certain behaviors and choices, execution, communication, intent, and we can track it through a game, a match. And what we're looking for is we're looking for if something's unacceptable, i.e. if the opposition come up with a tactic that the players initially aren't adjusting to. So now the momentum is effective in the opposition. How quickly can our players recognize it and then adapt? I can time that. Now I can put in the advanced element in the mastery, I can put in interventions where we can measure that and load it. So now I'm looking for, I can audit time of unacceptable, how quickly they can get back and how long to they can maintain it. And then I can put in other variables of pressure loading from the opposition, which we're going to talk about in the learning performance competition areas. So you can see this is actually a little Excel sheet example, but this is the audit of where I'm going. Now, imagine if you're doing that with all your critical markers. That's giving you real confidence that you're on the right track, but it's also giving you some audit. Say, I need to spend a bit more time on that. We need to put more content into this. We need to test or stress load this more. At least we know, at least we got data, we're not guessing. In my experience over the last 30 years, the only coaches that don't want to do this are the ones that are scared of the reality of the answers. They prefer it to not know. Well, that for me is dangerous, and actually that's not you being a great coach. Get over it, push the ego to the side. Your attitude should be, I really want to know. I want to know how well we're doing as coaches. I want to know how well the team's doing. And then I want to learn from that, what's working, what's not, so I can adapt it. I don't want to wait for the game to know something's not working. I need to set practice up to give me some good data, not in the moment, but after that session, in a week, in a month, whatever it may be, and keep that checking. So I hope this makes a connection. The key thing I'll end with this is to say that it's not about asking questions before. I see this happen a few times, and again in the school it can be a little bit more difficult if you're doing this with an education, but our aim should be, we don't want to do reminders. So if I put this back into sport, what I don't want to do is come in and then say, guys, a few questions, what is it we worked on 2 weeks ago? Or talk to me through that defense strategy that we did on Tuesday. So what I'm doing is, it's not covert recall anymore, I've just reminded them. So now when they go and see it and it looks good, it's not a tick box because now I've interfered. It's kind of, if you're doing an exam, I've just shown them the answers and then I set them into the exam. It's not real. So really important that we don't give any clues. We don't ask questions before. It's not about setting up success. It's about checking reality, and that's very different. There's times when we want to set up success in the learning phases. There's times when we want to check reality, covert recall, performance, competition phases. So we've got to know what cap we are. as a coach, and we've got to know when to not give clues and when to give clues, when to teach, when to support. And covert recall is definitely give nothing away, poker face, no clues, because we want to check reality. I'd suggest everyone puts this in straight away, because it's not a craft you need, it's data finding. So straight away, look at stuff you worked on in the past, make an Excel sheet list of the key areas, and then just start covert rechecking it. Covert recall here, and let's see how well they've done. And from that data, don't be scared of it. It's giving you data, and you can do something with that data. Maybe you need to go over it again. Maybe asking yourself, did we cover too much content? Did they see the value in it? Were they even there on those days? Or actually, had we moved on and new players have come in and we haven't made the connection? Were they engaged? Were they thinking for themselves? Were we too in drill and breakdown, but we didn't go back in the game with enough variables for them to see if they made the choices, whatever it may be? At least we're asking the questions, we're being the detective. So that is a basic overview of the covert recall. Now, this chapter and the one after, I'm on my 8th work through. So if you're receiving this, this is number 8. It's been a real challenge. You can probably see the hair has got slightly shorter since the previous chapter, and that's not that it's falling out, it's just it's taken that long. I've had a haircut since. The challenge with this, as I mentioned at the beginning, was finding the balance. So I've recorded this a few times. I've shared it with people, some that know PDS, but importantly people that haven't been through any training, and it was just too much. The challenge is obviously finding that balance to give you enough so it's impactful, but not too much where it's just now implodes your brain, even though you can pause and rewind. So I'm hoping I've found the sweet spot now. I've worked through this with a few people and they seem to be happier with it than the previous chapters. I think I went too much, then I went too stripped back. So I'm hoping now this is the balance. So as you can see, these are the main elements that I'll be working through. And then as we go through the next chapters, where bringing it alive and keeping it alive, is show how they start to interact. So you will see the slides repeated in the next chapters. Importantly, you'll see the same principle in different design slides, and the reason I've put those together is just to help people understand it in a way that may suit them a little bit more. Some like lists, some further, those infographic type images. So this is why I've gone through it a few times. So find the one that fits with you. Obviously then you can take your own notes, etc.